fascinating discovery class. Today I'm going to tell you about a person who was to do something that he knew didn't work. So what did he do? He ended up doing it his way. And that's my lesson today. Henry Ford, he described the same thing only like this. He said, failure is the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Are you aware that you carry God's fingerprints? The first chapter of the Bible tells us that. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And that's why humans are very unique from all other animals. I'm a person, I'm not an animal. It gets better. Each of us is made up with a special set of custom-built electrical circuits. Different personalities, different skill sets, different abilities. I suppose you could call it our profile, maybe our blueprint, maybe our personal DNA. In other words, we're programmed from birth. Have you found what your program is? Are you a teacher? Are you a professor, carpenter, pipe fitter, IT programmer, doctor, dentist? Maybe you're a scientist. Maybe you're a mother. Maybe you're a grandmother. Astronaut, maybe a farmer, a music teacher. I could go on and on. My lesson today is about a man who had an amazing gift and he knew how to use it. But he was told that he couldn't use it. Others had better ideas on what he should do, doing it their way. Our class study has been about personalities, all kinds of them. Men, women, prophets, kings, disciples, fishermen, even a prostitute. Our personality study today is about a young man who was the last child of a large family of older brothers. His name was David. His job? He was a shepherd, attending his father's large flock of sheep. And David loved his job, and he was good at it. I put him in the same league as Warren Buffett. He's the famous billionaire investor, remember? The CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, that large hedge fund that does most of its investing on Wall Street. Buffett, he was addressing a room full of college students one day, and they wanted to know what was the key to his success and his wealth. Here's what he said. If there's a difference between you and me, it may simply be that I get up every day and I have a chance to do what I love. If you want to learn anything from me, this is the best advice that I can give you. Do what you love. David, our personality, he had a love for something. That's my lesson today. The story is found in the 17th chapter of the book of 1 Samuel. In the Old Testament of your Bible, Israel was at war with an enemy called the Philistines. David had older brothers fighting in the Israeli army. The battle took place in Oak Valley, over there in Israel. The Philistines were on one hill, the Israelites on the opposing hill, with the valley in between. When you get down to verse 17, David's father says to him, I want you to take this sack of grain wheat and cracked wheat and these 10 loaves of bread. You can leave your job looking after the sheep. I'll keep an eye on them. I want you to run these down to your brothers who are down there on the front line fighting. And check out your brothers. See how they're getting along. And I want you to bring me word on just how they're doing and how's the battle going. When he arrived at the camp, the army was moving into battle formation. he heard the Philistine champion, his name was Goliath from Gath, and he stepped out from the front lines of the Philistines, and he gave his usual rant. The Israelites, to a man, fell back the moment they saw the giant, totally frightened. Then David, he heard these words from one of the troops. The man who kills that giant, the king is going to give him a huge reward. He's going to get his daughter, first of all, to be his bride, and he's going to be given a large pension that he can enjoy all the rest of his life. Here's where my lesson begins. David is going to take up this huge challenge that nobody else wanted. If you're going to fight a Goliath, wisdom tells you that giant killers have to be pretty strong. And you got to be almost as strong as the enemy or better. And you got to be well armed, because the giant was. He wears big armor. He has a heavy helmet. He carries a massive shield. And the same for his sword. King Saul knew that. And he looks at David. And in verse 37, he says to David, "Go. God help you." Then Saul outfitted David as a soldier in his army with his armor. And he put his bronze helmet on David's head. And then he took the belted sword and he tied it around David's waist. Then David tried to walk. He could barely budge. David said to Saul, "I can't even move with all this stuff on. And I'm not used to it." So he took it off. You can't wear armor that is somebody else's. You have to find what fits you. Have you found what fits you? There comes a point in each of our lives when we must brush aside the expectations of others who want you to do their job their way. Parents, peers, society, they put pressure on you to do it their way. And if you do you know what's going to happen to you? You're going to be crushed. David cast aside all those expectations that others threw at him. And he knew what he was designed to do. And he knew what he was good at. And he also knew what he wasn't good at. Carrying heavy armor, anything he tried, was all foreign to him. He was too small. But David had with him a rock and a sling. David knew he could do whatever God wanted him to do, wearing his own armor, not somebody else's. Have you ever made a sling? The one I'm talking about in this Old Testament story? The one that David used? I did. When I was a kid growing up, my parents, they didn't have any money, but I didn't know it. We made our own toys. Did you make your own toys? We never went to the store. We just made our own. Kites, stilts, sleighs, even slings. We made our own sling just like David did. I'll describe it for you. You cut the tongue out of your dad's old leather boot. It's about the size of a slice of bread. You poke a hole in each end, and you connect the two strings with a meat cord, 2.5 feet, maybe 3 feet long, depending on how tall you are. And you make a little noose at the end of one cord, and you tie a knot on the other. Now the lasso that you tied, you put it in the middle finger of your slinging hand. The other string with the knot is pinched between your pointer finger and your thumb, and there you hold it, and this becomes the trigger, so that when you sling, you let that go, and off goes the rock. That pinch is your trigger. My target practice was Mother's empty kitchen cans sitting on the top of the fence post. Do you know, you'd go back 50 feet, maybe 100 feet, and you would shoot that sling. And I got so that I could knock that can off that fence post 7 out of 10 times. And you didn't want to be a pigeon on the top of the barn either. Well, my wife and I, we live in Cochrane. And Mary and I will walk the Bow River. It flows through the center of our town. It's a beautiful wide river. And it flows from the glacier-fed mountains of the Rockies. And the water is clear, it's cold. On the other side of the river, on either side of the river, are beautiful footpaths. And you can walk the river's edge and go right down, and you can witness the trout. You can even see the bottom of the river, 6 feet deep in places. Preparing this talk, I walked where I had just described, and I pretended I was David. I chose 5 smooth stones like he did, and I brought them home in a bag, and here they are. And these 5 stones, when you pick them up from the bottom of the river, they're beautiful, and they're smooth as can be. They've been riding down there probably for hundreds of years. These 5 stones, like he picked, I just picked them out of the bottom just to see what they'd be. And this would be about the same size of the rock that David would sling. And it's a missile, it's a bullet, and you wouldn't want to get hit with it, I can assure you. I have removed many pigeons from Dad's barn with something just about that size. Now I'm going to read it for you. David sees Goliath. He hears his threats. He told King Saul that he doesn't want his armor. Saul told him in verse 33, you can't go. You're not going to fight that Philistine. You're too young. You're inexperienced. Goliath has been fighting this business of war since before you were born. David heard that, and he said to him in verse 34, I've been a shepherd. I've been tending sheep for my dad. And whenever a lion or a bear came and took the lamb from the flock, I'd go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. And if those animals turned on me, I'd kill them with my sling. I'm going to do that to that Philistine. He's only a pig to me. God delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear. He's going to deliver me from that Philistine. Does that sound like somebody insecure and full of fear? What does David do? Verse 40. He took a staff. He selected 5 smooth stones from the brook. He put them in his pocket and then into his little packet, his shepherd's pouch. And with his sling in his hand, the Bible says he approached Goliath. Well, Goliath, seeing this young shepherd approaching him with no battle dress, begins to ridicule him. Verse 43. Am I a dog that you come to me with a stick? I'm going to make roadkill out of you, and the buzzards are going to come and eat. I'm going to turn you into a tasty morsel for the field mice. With words like that, would that scare you? Do you think David is now going to change his mind? And he's going to go running back to the Hebrew camp? Here's David's answer, verse 45. You come to me with a sword and a spear and a big battle axe. I come to you in the name of God of the armies of Israel, the one that you curse and the one that you continually mock. Today, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to cut your head off, and I'm going to serve your body to the crows and the coyotes. Do you think that's the voice of somebody scared? He wore no protection. What he did get, he returned to the military, all the uniforms that he'd given him. He saw the enemy's uniform. Is David really a failure before he starts? King Saul saw him as a failure. Like Henry Ford said, but David, failure is an opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently, wearing only his own armor and his own little bag and his own 5 smooth stones. Here it comes. Verse 49. David, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a stone and he put it in his sling. And then he wound and he slung it. And he hit the Philistine right in the center of his forehead. The Philistine crashed to the earth, face down in the dirt. David rushed over and he pulled the giant's sword from out of its sheath. And he finished the job by cutting off his head. And when the enemy saw this, they scattered. David, he could never do what God wanted him to do wearing somebody else's armor. That's what I call an enigma. It means someone who baffles someone else's understanding. King Saul would not attempt to fight Goliath, even though he had all the armor, but he didn't have a lot of understanding. King Saul's soldiers, when they heard that man's rant, they wouldn't attack either. They were full of fear. David, the youngest son of Jesse, had experienced greatness. And being faithful on the job as a shepherd, honing his skills as a lamb protector and trusting in God, and all he had was this, one of these, in his sling. History has a modern illustration of this. It happened in World War II. It happened in England. It was in an estate called the Bletchley Park. And behind the walls of ivy, the Allied forces had assembled a secret army of cryptologists. What was that? Well, their job was to decode German radio intercepts. German submarines were sinking English and American ships, carrying war supplies to the battlefront. And they sunk them by the hundreds. Those subs intercepted and slaughtered the Allied ships. The goal of these cryptologists was at Bletchley Park to break the German radio code in what was coming from all their submarines. It was called Operation Enigma. The real break came when they received various parts and manuals from captured German code machines on the boats that they had captured. They found the chink in the German Goliath's armor. The Enigma, working backwards, cracked the code of the German secret. And the Battle of the Atlantic reversed. Immediately, the Allies made intercepts. And with these new informations they found, Allied warships could elude the enemy. And the Enigma decoding was critical to the victory of Europe. What do you do well? What are you good at? David had a rock and he had a sling. It was an enigma in the hands of a simple shepherd boy. It was a crude sling and a smooth rock from the brook, but you know it won the battle. David, before the battle, he didn't care what the others thought. He had confidence in the freedom that God had given him, and he was full of confidence, and he knew his skills. And he could never do what he did wearing somebody else's armor. David had found what fits him. Let me ask you, what fits you? Have you figured it out? That's what the lesson's about. Finding the right fit starts with you, and you've got to do a bit of an assessment. Everyone possesses greatness. You've got to just have to find it. The most unlikely source of victory came to the Hebrews from the most unlikely personality. David possessed unique fingerprints. God endowed him with certain skill sets and certain ability. Well, God's done the very same with you. Have you found your program? Look for your God-given blueprint. He's wired you to find it. There's going to be Goliaths out there that you can topple. Why don't you ask God to help you with your DNA? He can help you find it. And when you do, you can go forth and win. And you don't know, but something as small as this can give you probably your greatest victory. Well, that's my lesson today. Come on back next week. I'll have another one for you. Thanks for dropping by.